The first jolt of turbulence came so suddenly that several passengers gasped at once. Coffee spilled, seatbelts snapped tight, and a man in an expensive suit sleeping beside a tired single father jolted awake, just as the father instinctively raised his arm to protect his daughter. That moment somewhere above the clouds would change 3 lives forever. Daniel Carter hadn't slept properly in weeks. Being a single dad to 8-year-old Lily was a full-time job, and working night shifts as a mechanic in Dallas barely covered the rent. This flight to Chicago was supposed to be a fresh start. Daniel had finally been offered a job interview at a larger aviation repair company. If he got the job, things might finally become easier. Lily sat beside him by the window, clutching her small stuffed rabbit. Her blonde hair rested against Daniel's shoulder as she quietly watched the clouds outside. "Daddy, are we really going to live in a new city?" she asked softly. Daniel forced a warm smile. "Maybe, sweetheart, if Daddy does well tomorrow." Across the aisle, a tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit struggled with his laptop while speaking sharply into his phone. "Tell them the meeting is postponed. I don't care how important it is," he said impatiently. Several passengers glanced at him. His tone carried authority and stress. His name was Jonathan Reed, though nobody on the plane knew it yet. To the business world, he was the powerful CEO of Reed Aerospace Industries, one of the largest aviation companies in the country. But right now, he looked exhausted. When the plane finally leveled out after takeoff, Jonathan rubbed his eyes and leaned back heavily in his seat. Daniel noticed the dark circles under the man's eyes. "Long day?" Daniel asked politely. Jonathan gave a tired half-laugh. "You could say that." Within minutes, the man's head slowly tilted sideways. Then, unexpectedly, it rested on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel blinked in surprise. Normally, people would push a stranger away immediately, but Daniel just glanced at the sleeping man and then at Lily. She giggled quietly. "Daddy, he's using you like a pillow." Daniel chuckled softly. Guess he needed it. Instead of waking him, Daniel stayed perfectly still. The man must have been truly exhausted. For the next 20 minutes, the plane flew peacefully while Jonathan Reed slept more deeply than he had in months, completely unaware he was leaning on a struggling single father who had every reason to be irritated but chose kindness instead. Then the turbulence hit. The plane suddenly dropped several feet. Gasps echoed through the cabin. Lily grabbed Daniel's arm. "Daddy." "I've got you," Daniel said quickly, pulling her closer. Another violent shake rocked the aircraft. Overhead bins rattled, and a flight attendant grabbed a seat for balance. Jonathan woke instantly. What's happening?" "Turbulence," Daniel said calmly. But something about Daniel's voice was different. Not panicked. Not afraid. Controlled. The plane jolted again, harder this time. Passengers began whispering nervously. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing unexpected severe turbulence." A loud bang echoed from somewhere beneath the cabin. That was when Daniel's expression changed. He listened carefully, eyes narrowing. Years of working with aircraft engines had trained his ears. Something didn't sound right. Another vibration ran through the plane, different from normal turbulence. Jonathan noticed the shift in Daniel's posture. "You okay?" he asked. Daniel hesitated. "I might be wrong," he said quietly, "but that vibration sounds like it's coming from the left engine housing." Jonathan stared at him. "You can tell that from here." "I work on planes," Daniel replied. Before Jonathan could respond, the captain's voice returned, this time with a hint of tension. "We are currently checking a minor technical alert. Please remain calm." Jonathan's eyes widened. The man beside him had predicted it seconds before the announcement. The plane shook again. Lily squeezed Daniel's hand. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" Daniel knelt slightly so he could look into her eyes. "We will be," he said gently. Jonathan watched the interaction closely. The calm, the confidence, the quiet strength. This wasn't just a mechanic. Another announcement came. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there are any certified aircraft engineers or mechanics on board, please alert a flight attendant." Several passengers looked around nervously. Daniel slowly raised his hand. A flight attendant rushed over. "Yes, sir. I'm an aircraft maintenance specialist," Daniel said. 10 years. The attendant nodded quickly and led him toward the front of the cabin. Jonathan sat there stunned. The man who had just let a stranger sleep on his shoulder was now walking toward the cockpit during an emergency. Lily looked nervous. Jonathan leaned closer. "Hey," he said gently, "your dad looks pretty brave." "He fixes airplanes," Lily said proudly. "He says planes are like puzzles." Jonathan smiled faintly. Minutes later, Daniel entered the cockpit. Inside, warning lights glowed. One of the engine sensors was malfunctioning, causing erratic readings and vibration alerts. Daniel quickly examined the panel information. "It's likely a sensor fault," he explained, "but the vibration could trigger automatic power reduction." The pilots listened carefully. Daniel suggested a manual override procedure that would stabilize the system until landing. 10 tense minutes passed. Then the turbulence began to ease. The captain's voice came on again. "Ladies and gentlemen, the issue has been resolved. We appreciate your patience." The cabin filled with relieved applause. When Daniel returned to his seat, Lily hugged him tightly. "You fixed it." Daniel laughed softly. "Just helped." Jonathan stared at him with new respect. "You might have just saved this entire flight." Daniel shrugged, "Just doing what I know." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he extended his hand. "Jonathan Reed." Daniel shook it. "Daniel Carter." Jonathan smiled slightly. "You know, Reed Aerospace builds the engines for planes like this." Daniel froze. "Wait, Reed Aerospace?" Jonathan nodded. "I'm the CEO." Daniel nearly laughed in disbelief. "You're kidding." "Nope." They sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Jonathan spoke again. "Tell me something, Daniel. Why didn't you wake me earlier when I fell asleep on you?" Daniel smiled. "You looked like someone who hadn't rested in a long time." Jonathan leaned back slowly. For years, people had treated him differently once they knew who he was. But Daniel had treated him like just another tired human being. No expectations. No favors. Just kindness. Jonathan turned to Lily. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "A pilot," she said proudly. Jonathan chuckled. "Well, I might be able to help with that someday." Daniel assumed it was just a polite comment. But Jonathan Reed was already making a decision. The next morning, Daniel arrived nervously at his job interview in Chicago. When he entered the conference room, he stopped in shock. At the head of the table sat Jonathan Reed and several executives from Reed Aerospace. Jonathan smiled. "Good morning, Daniel." Daniel blinked. "You work here." Jonathan laughed. "I own it." The executives looked amused. Jonathan leaned forward. "I reviewed your record last night. 10 years of experience, perfect safety history, and yesterday you helped stabilize one of our aircraft mid-flight." Daniel was speechless. Jonathan stood and extended his hand again. "How would you like to become our new lead aircraft safety specialist. Daniel's eyes widened. That's a huge job. Jonathan nodded. So was letting a stranger sleep on your shoulder. The room chuckled softly. Daniel slowly accepted the handshake. Later that evening, Daniel and Lily stood outside their new apartment overlooking the Chicago skyline. Lily looked up at him. "Daddy, is this our new life?" Daniel smiled. "Yes, sweetheart." Far above them, airplanes crossed the evening sky. Sometimes life changes not because of power, money, or luck. Sometimes it changes because of a small moment of kindness, like letting a tired stranger rest his head on your shoulder. And sometimes the universe notices.